everyone, from wherever you are in the world, whether it be early in the morning or mid-afternoon or late at night. Welcome to this session on supporting English as a second language in your early years environment. So today we're going to be exploring this, and I hope to be offering you lots of ideas, strategies, practical tips that you can use in the young learners classroom. So let's have a look. Depending on your level here as well, I know there are some people as well who may be from early primary. So you can think about how you may adapt some of these ideas, but a lot of the rationale and the strategies are also perfectly applicable for your environment too. So let's have a look. First of all, let's have a look at the agenda for today. So we'll be looking at the importance of language overall for young children. This will include their home language as well. Celebrating cultural diversity and home languages in the classroom. The home-school connection. So this will be between parents, between tutors and yourself. We're going to have a little overview of the early years child and kind of some top tips, things to look out for, things to be aware of in terms of the early years child development between the ages of 3 and 6. We're going to look at some top tips and strategies and some practical ideas for the classroom, which I hope you'll be able to take away and use tomorrow in your class. So first of all, let's have a look at the importance of language for young children in this age group. Now, I've coined a phrase from Vygotsky here, which I think sums up language as a whole. We have to bear in mind that children are learning their first language at this stage as well, and they will not be very competent either. So Vygotsky says that the language is the most powerful tool in the development of any human being. I'm sure as language teachers, you will agree with that. He describes it as the greatest asset that we possess. And to have a good grasp of language, whichever language that might be, is synonymous with the sound ability to think. In other words, language and thought are inseparable. We'll be looking at this sound ability to think shortly, because the ability to think as well and to speak in different languages, whether that be 1, 2, or 3 or more, inevitably broadens our minds. So we'll be looking at this today as well in the session. I think we have to think about these first 6 years in the life of a child are crucial. Particularly in their first language, where they're learning about their cultural identity. They may be from another culture. Their parents will be maybe from a different culture. So they will be learning about this culture, as well as the culture that they are now moving in, and possibly this English as an additional language, such as English. So there are lots of different things happening in these children's lives. At this stage, they're building a knowledge of the world around them. They're seeing how adults act. It's their first experience for many at school. They may be anxious. They may feel slightly insecure, depending on the personality of a child. So many things are happening in this child's world. Not only are they developing in terms of language in their first, in their home language, but also they're developing behaviorally, sociably. They're learning to interact with their peers. So moving on, if we look at, I just talked about the cognitive development as well. All of these sort of helps them to enhance their awareness of linguistic structures. When they're learning different languages, they're improving their listening, problem solving, critical thinking skills. And if you'd like to look into this more, then we have the Cambridge Principles into Practice Language Guide, which you can see here. There's a link to that you can get later in the presentation. But learning a second or additional language for children does lay the awareness of this cultural awareness and understanding to broaden, we talked about earlier, to broaden these perceptions. Learners as well, I think children are so curious about things that they do love discovering how children and other cultures live. So identifying these similarities and differences in their lifestyles at home and in this new culture can be really, we can really make it personal and motivating. And we'll look at how we can draw on these similarities and differences in our classroom and how we teach these children. So, moving on, let's think about how we can celebrate this cultural diversity and home languages in the classroom. And I'd just like to highlight that it is essential that home languages do have a role in our ESL classroom. So how can we show appreciation of our home languages? Well, perhaps at the beginning of a school term, one of the first things we could do is something you can see below, which is in the New Early Years book, which is learning new words together. So we could learn about how to say hello in different languages or goodbye, for example. Here we have an example. I'm based in Spain, so we can have hola, adios. We have ni hao. And we can make a poster, maybe a big poster on the classroom wall. And here we have ways of how to say goodbye to, namaste, etc., etc. So that'd be a nice way to bring in different languages into the early years classroom. Okay, another way is to perhaps to learn simple words in the child's first language. How could we do this? Well, you may not speak the language of the child, but perhaps you could say, how do you say hello or goodbye or welcome in your language, and show interest and listen and learn from the children too. This will make them feel secure. It will make them feel more at home in this environment. And having them share with you different words in their language, their home language that they are learning, which will help them no end as they begin to learn this second language. The other thing we can do, which I remember teaching, well, children in Spain, very, very young children, they're actually from 2 to 3, is sounds in a different language. And if we think about, for example, it came to mind, do any of you know the Old MacDonald Had a Farm rhyme? So, for example, in English, we would say, Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm, he had a dog, for example, E-I-E-I-O. Now, the children in my early years classroom found it very funny when I started to say, because obviously a dog in English will say woof, woof. So as I began to say a woof, woof here and a woof, woof there, here a woof, there a woof, everywhere a woof, woof, they began to laugh. And I said, well, why are you laughing? And they said, well, in Spanish, a dog doesn't woof. It says, wow. So completely different, because obviously for us in English to say wow is we're surprised by something. But in Spanish, wow is the sound of a dog. Again, drawing on these sounds, you could say, what sound does a sheep make, for example, in your language? And often they are different, curiously enough. Another very funny one was the cockerel, which will obviously make it sound early in the morning. And in English, it's cockle-doodle-doo. Well, believe it or not, think about what it is in your language. But in Spanish, it's kikiridi. So we have completely different sounds. Again, drawing on similarities and differences in the two languages. Some other ideas about celebrating diversity and home language as well is to encourage children to speak their home language as well as small words and small chunks of language they're learning in this additional language in their socio-dramatic play, so role play. I'm sure in your classroom, you'll have continuous provision areas. So these will be those different areas in the classroom where children can do role play. You may have a dressing up box. There may be a construction area where there are building blocks. There may be a kitchen area where they can pretend to cook and make their own recipes. Well, in these areas, encourage them to talk, to use language, whether it be their home language or whether it be this second language. We talked about showing interest in their home language. Perhaps you can highlight any comparisons in the sounds or words. There are usually similarities. For example, from my experience being a bilingual speaker as well in Spanish, we know that animal in English is animal in Spanish. So we can draw those and say, oh, we say that too, but we pronounce it animal. You could possibly learn some simple functional words in their home languages. Show interest. How do we say this in your language? And say, oh, and also repeating what the word would be in this additional language. The other thing is, if you have class mascots, like I've got one here that I've used a lot, my little monkey, make sure they kind of engage in chat. Children love imaginary play, so make sure they engage in chat with the puppets or the class puppets or even the cuddly toys in the classroom. So it might be, hello, how are you today? I'm fine, thank you. Encouraging them to use simple functional language in this second language will be very helpful, but also they may be mixing it with their home language too. Another idea is to bring in or to invite parents or their carers or tutors to sing a traditional rhyme or song from their culture. It may mean there's overlap. Perhaps it's a rhyme, a similar one that exists in, for example, English as well, and they can introduce it to the children in this other language. Another idea is to include dual language books in your reading area in the classroom. We'll be looking at a few, but there are some very famous ones that have been translated into many languages. So for example, a classic here, which is very well used, is The Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle, which talks about the food the caterpillar eats before it turns into a butterfly at the end. Another one could be something like Dear Zoo, another classic where children have little flaps and they can discover the different wild animals that have been sent through the post because they want their perfect pet. So celebrating all this diversity in the classroom. So homeschool connection, this comes to a part which for many, many years has been perhaps overlooked or just touched on. But as we're teaching younger and younger children in the classroom, in this ESL classroom, the homeschool connection becomes more and more essential to establish and to maintain throughout the school year. So let's have a look at a few ideas here. What's the importance here in nurturing the homeschool connection and reaching out to parents during the school year? I think from the outset, we need to establish meaningful dialogues with the parents. What do I mean by that? We need to, at the beginning of the course, perhaps share information about the curriculum, what the children will be learning at different times of the year. So it may be the first, for example, unit or term will be learning about themselves, their bodies, talking about their families, all the general topics that we'll be looking at in the early years classroom. You could share information about the classroom setting. You could take photos of the classroom setting so parents are aware of how their children will be moving in this environment, and maybe upload the photos to a school platform. Talk about the routines. You may send the routine chant homes, the songs, the musics, and the stories the children will be reading. Another very nice idea to establish during the school year is to have a class puppet travel. So your class puppet, whether it be a monkey, whether it be any other animal that you have for your course, or one that you're very fond of to use in your classroom, is to start the class puppets travel scrapbook. What would this involve? Well, it would involve a big book where each child has a page. So perhaps once a week, this puppet will go along in its little bag with the parents and the child home with the book for the children, and with the help of their parents, to maybe take a photo of them doing something together. This could be the puppet sitting while the child cleans their teeth, or perhaps when the child is helping to cook or mix something to prepare a recipe. when they're reading with the puppet. This I found to be a very rewarding and beneficial to the children and for the parents too. And they could just write, the parents, whether it be in the home language or if they are able to in the second language, to say this is a picture of, for example, Jose reading a story with the class puppet. And by the end of the class year, you obviously have a full scrapbook with the puppet's travels to the different houses. You can share videos via the school platform of children engaging in play. That's also a lovely idea to engage the families at all time. We mentioned before inviting the parents to read a story or to sing a traditional rhyme in their culture. And I think this importance of to try and stay connected throughout the year in some way, shape or form. And bearing in mind as well that this parental involvement particularly at this age group, is key to the child's success at school. So if we move on, the early years child, I think often we need reminders of who they are, what they're like, and what stages they are in and their development, overall development. I just listed here a few key pointers. I think when it comes to language, what we need to be aware of with these learners in our classroom is that, and this happens with any child learning a language, is there's often a silent period. Now, as a teacher, a silent period can cause, especially if we're not very experienced, I remember this happening to me, kind of a little bit of panic, thinking, I'm a language teacher and I want the children to reply to me to produce this language that they're learning. But we have to be respectful of this period, and it could last a different amount of time in different children, given that all children are unique. This could last up to 6 months for some children. All it means is they're listening, they're acquiring the sounds of this new language, the rhythm, and they're processing it. They're internalizing the language. And when they are ready, they will begin to produce. The other thing children are very good at is copying. I found that children in my early years classroom, they began to listen to repeated phrases I was using a lot. And one of their favorites, and a very curious one, was, what do I do? What do I do in English? So when a child is unsure, I began to say, well, let's ask, what do I do? What do I do? Now, a lot of children like the sound of this question. Obviously, it's very rhythmic. It has a certain element for different children from different backgrounds of humor to it. And the children began to constantly say, what do I do? What do I do? But also adding gestures, another very important element of children learning language and us being able to transmit meaning is to use gestures. So what do I do became a, what do I do? What do I do? And by the end of the first term, I had a lot of 3 or 4-year-olds looking at me and say, what do I do? What do I do? Which was wonderful. Children are very observant. Even though you think they may not be, they're very observant, and they are like sponges at this age. So even though they may not be producing the language earlier on in the term, they are absorbing it all like sponges. The other thing we need to bear in mind is that children at this age, because their brains are like sponges at this age group, unlike ours as we get older, it's more difficult for us to learn languages. They can learn more than one language with relative ease if they do have good language models, which are obviously you, the teacher, and lots of exposure, lots of good exposure to this second language. We have to remember that we are the model. And I understand that for some teachers, you can feel a little bit unsure if it's not your first language. You are a language teacher and you are a good model. I'm going to give you an example of my son, who was brought up bilingual, English and Spanish, and his first years at school, and from the age of 3, were for many years with a teacher from the Philippines, who she'd been taught American English. My son, for the first at least 8 years of his life, had an American accent. And I'm obviously, you can see up here that I'm British, because she was a very good model for learning English for my son. So it also shows that he probably spent more time with the teacher than with me, his mother, perhaps. But again, being this good model. And the other thing we have to bear in mind is that comprehension at this stage, 3 to 6, always exceeds the ability to communicate. Remember, at this age group, we're concentrating on listening and speaking skills, and we'll be teaching pre-reading and pre-writing skills. We are setting the stage for them to be good readers and good writers. But first, we need the communication skills. So strategies to help us in the classroom, things to bear in mind as teachers, is repeat. The first thing is repeat. Now, if children like something at this age group, repeat it time and time again, whether that be a story, whether it be a rhyme, whether it be a routine chant, which we'll look at shortly. Repeat it. Children are very good at learning something quite quickly, but they forget just as quickly, which is why we need to repeat things time and time again, especially if they like it, a story or a song. The other strategy, which is a good one to bear in mind, is to remodel. Something called parallel talk. Parallel talk could be when a child is doing an activity, perhaps with an activity book, perhaps they're drawing their favorite animal or their house, and it would be you monitoring, going around and talking to the different children and basically talking, narrating what they're doing. So, for example, you could be saying, oh, so this is a house. Oh, and look, your house has 4 windows. Can you show me the door? Again, you can be describing it to the children. They're listening and they may be answering some of your questions at the same time, giving them good context, parallel talk, talk with them about what they're doing. Or the puppet can talk with them about what they're doing. The other thing is recall. By recall, I mean if they've been learning about wild animals, food, for example, talking about their families, then create this visually rich environment in your classroom. What could this be? If it's the family, it could be a family tree with photos that they brought from home to stick on the wall. It could be food, their favorite foodstuffs. Or, for example, fruit that grows on trees. So there's always a reference that's visual to them so that we can recall at any moment. Okay, so for example, for like fast finishes, let's have a look at the word wall or the picture wall and let's talk about the food we like, for example. And the other is to repurpose or to reenact something. This would be like socio-dramatic play. So for example, having your continuous provision areas set up so that children can go back and reenact something again. So top tips for us as a teacher. The first thing is to make sure that we speak clearly and slowly for the children, repeating often. Listen to children, listen attentively and be sensitive to what they say, even though it may be a mix of home language, some of this additional language, and maybe even babble. Babble is when a child is just trying to put all these sounds and words together to create a word. You know, when if those of you have children, they'll open a picture book and just and you may hear some sounds in their home language or the second language. This is babbling. And this is how language comes to fruition and they can eventually speak this second language. Gestures, I'm using them now. Use gestures to convey meaning as well. We talked about creating this visually rich environment. And also an interesting one is to link children's experiences to their interests. How often do we ask children what they like doing? Every child, again, is unique, and it may be worthwhile at the beginning of a school term when you're creating this homeschool connection with parents is to ask parents or get them to write down what their children like. What are their favorite things? What do they like doing at home? Is it a certain type of game? Do they have a special interest in animals, etc., etc.? And link So these experiences and things you do in the classroom to their interests. Another thing is to keep these continuous provision areas and resources consistent and add to when necessary to enrich their language learning. What could this be? It may be a construction area where you're talking about transport. We'll be looking at a story shortly about that involves transport in a city. They may be building their favorite type of transport or a fantasy type of transport. So keep adding to these areas to enrich learning at all times. So some practical ideas. We've already, I think I've been kind of weaving them in as I've been talking, but other practical ideas for the classroom. These play-based activities for learning opportunities. For example, role play activities for simple dialogues and questions. One that was particularly successful in my classroom was setting up a going to the market. So we'd have the tables set out in the classroom. We'd have the sellers. So they would have their produce, whether it was, for example, plastic fruit, any kind of plastic food laid out on a table. And we'd have the people who are going shopping, and maybe they'd have a little bag, a little paper bag, or maybe a little basket if you have one available. And we'd practice this simple dialogue, very useful chunks of language, which would be, can I have an apple, please? Can I have a lemon, please? Can I have a mango, please? The response from the seller, which is standing behind their little stall, their little table, will be, yes, here you are. Thank you. And they've moved to the next seller. So teaching them very manageable, useful, functional language and moving around the classroom as they play going to the market. Obviously, then you need to change the seller and the buy around. This is an incredibly successful role play activity in the early years classroom. Another idea, if you're able to in your setting, is to go on a nature walk and to use descriptive language. So again, this would be you using parallel talk to describe things and to encourage the children to describe too. It could be talking about the colour of flowers, to talk about the texture of leaves, to even count the petals on flowers, and maybe to take back leaves or flowers to create a collage or to do a stencil, which then can be displayed on the classroom wall. Construction area for positional language. Put the red brick on the blue brick. Put the green brick next to next to, on top of, under. This could be a class-led activity where you're leading the activity and then encouraging the children to do it themselves, to tell their partner where to put the construction, if they're building a big tower, for example. So yes, useful language. Things like put. Put is an incredibly useful chunk of language. So put it. It could be put it in the bin, put it on the table, put it on the yellow block. Again, listening to this useful, functional language all the time. And then to set up routines and chants in the classroom. So we're going to have a look at some routine chants. Why routines? Routines are incredibly important for the ESL learner in the classroom. Firstly, because it creates this kind of sense of familiarity. Children like routines, they like routines and they need routines in their home life as well. So they know what to expect. It reduces anxiety and they're comforting. They know when they come into a classroom, perhaps you sit on a circle in circle time. And here's an example for you. Again, it's not a melody, it could be just a rhythmic chant. Here's one which is circle time. Hold hands, circle around. Now sit down on the ground. It's circle time. Another circle time chant could be one of my favorites, which I think I made up a long time ago, was everybody sit down, sit down, sit down. Everybody sit down, look at me. And we'd repeat that a couple of times until all the children are looking at the teacher to start the class. We have here a well done chant. Well done, and include the name. Well done. Well done. It's a great thing that you've done. Always be positive and always start with the positive with young children. Other things can come later. Washing hands chants. Obviously, before we come into the classroom or leave the classroom, turn on the water, splish. Take the soap, bubble and scrub, bubble and scrub. Rinse off the soap, turn off the water and dry your hands. And here we have a sorry chant too. We'll look at a story chant in a minute before we look at some storytelling techniques in the ESL classroom too. Finger rhymes. Finger rhymes are fantastic for this level. They can be done again with or without music. They're repetitive. Anything which is repetitive with these kind of chunks of language that you can see here. Where are you? Here I am. Here I am. How are you? So very useful language and repetitive. You can use props such as the one we have here. You can make little finger puppets so the children could reenact the family rhyme in the play area. So this one's a family rhyme. I was thinking about, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this one. I was thinking about how we could even maybe adapt different rhymes too. Obviously, the family finger rhyme is a very traditional one. And I was thinking about another one, which is a very popular one with English children, which could be adapted to all kinds of different animals. And we could go back to the market theme we just talked about, which is, for example, I'm going to use a monkey for this finger rhyme. And we're going to have this little monkey went to the market. This little monkey stayed at home. This little monkey, now at this point I'd say, what do you think a monkey will buy at the market? What does a monkey eat? Of course, a banana. This little monkey had a banana, and this little monkey stayed at home. And this little monkey went all the way home. Children could do this in pairs because the idea is, this is a very traditional rhyme that a lot of mothers sing to their children in England. Usually at the end, it's like you tickle each other. So for example, we could use it with a crocodile. We could use it with a bigger animal. So children could choose their animal for this finger rhyme. So adapting rhymes as well can be very useful and fun in the ESL classroom. We're going to move on. This will be the last part of the talk, is to the power of stories. Now, stories in any young learner's environment are crucial and extremely valuable for the development of new language. Why? Because they offer so many different contexts, and often stories use words that children might otherwise not hear on a daily basis, either in the classroom or at home. However, it's very important to select stories that are age appropriate, by that with little language, appropriate language. In many ways, repetitive language can be good. That has some nice, simple, descriptive language that are visually rich and have lots of, draw the children in with the beautiful pictures. And again, as I just mentioned, repetitive chunks of language. Earlier, I mentioned these two stories. So for example, Dear Zoo, The Hungry Caterpillar are often available in other languages. So it may be something that children already know in their home language. So it's great to have that knowledge to then listen to them in this second language. Again, context. It's very good to talk about context that they are familiar with and that they're learning about, something that forms part of their environment. So we're going to do one, which is this one here. I actually have I show you the book. We're going to do one from the New Early Years course. This is called In the City by Dominika Lipniewska. And we're going to look at how this story, some story techniques for using in the ESL classroom. So if you have a look straight away, if you look at the visuals here, we have very primary colours, which draw in the children. They're quite geometric. So we're looking at kind of a different style. But again, there's lots of detail that we can draw on as teachers. Now, perhaps the first thing you can say is we're going to listen to a story about in the city. But first of all, we'd settle the children down. And this is a little story chant that you might like to use in the classroom. And it goes like this. It's story time. It's story time. Let's listen to a story with me. It's story time. It's story time. Let's listen to a story today. So this story is about in the city. First, you might like to talk to the children and say, do we live in a city? What's in a city? Or perhaps they don't live in the city. Perhaps you live near the sea or you live in a country. Ask children if they know what you can see in a city or what's different in a city from their environment. So this is how we're going to do this story. So the city wakes up slowly. Oh, can you wake up with me, children? Oh, we wake up very early. What can we see waking up in the picture? Oh, the birds are waking up. Can you point to the birds in the picture? How many birds can you see? Now soon everything moves very fast, very fast. Can you move fast? Very fast, very fast. In the hustle and the bustle of the morning rush. Now, what things in the picture move fast? So here we'd ask children today, can you see a car? What colour are the cars? Do they move fast? We also have a choo-choo, choo-choo, a train. Do trains move fast? So again, lots of repetition of this key language and having children identifying and pointing to the different transport they can see in the picture. In the city, you can find buildings that are tall. Look at these tall buildings. What color are the tall buildings? The children would say blue, yellow, red. And then there are small buildings. Do you live in a small building? Where do you live? Do you live in a building like this? They maybe live in a flat or an apartment or a house. And then in the city, there are places to go that are green and leafy, where you can find creatures and animals of all different sizes. Can you see any animals in the picture? Oh, yes, there's a bird. And can you see a squirrel? A little squirrel eating nuts. So again, children can be pointing to the different elements. People are very, very different in the city, and they have all different kind of jobs. But lots of people like the same things. What kind of people can you see in the picture? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, there's the mummy. She's pushing the pram. And there's a girl walking her dog. So again, getting them to talk about the people they can see in the pictures. But the city can be a very noisy place. Beep. What a lot of sounds. It's noisy. Which of these, oh, look at all these vehicles. Which do you think is the noisiest? Children can point to those which are the noisiest. They might say the helicopter, or others might say the ambulance, or perhaps the digger that's digging up the ground, or the baby. Again, encouraging the children to talk about what they can see in the picture. So in the city, people travel around in different ways. You may like to ask the children which type of transport they have used. So again, making it personal to the children, or perhaps a type of transport they'd like to go on. For example, have you been on a plane? No. Would you like to go on a plane? And again, children can talk about the vehicles they've been in. At the zoo, you can see amazing animals that don't come from the city, but can teach us about nature. What animals can you see in the picture? Which are your favorite animals? People in the city have different jobs. Which ones do you know? Again, children can identify those in their home language. You can then tell them what it is in the second language, and they can talk about perhaps their parents have one of these jobs too. At night, some parts of the city are fast asleep. Are you asleep at night? Shh. But not everyone sleeps at night. Who is still awake? And children can talk about which people are awake. The people in the ambulances, the doctors and the nurses, for example. At sunrise, everything wakes up again. Let's wake up, children, to start another day in the city. So there's a few ideas for how you might like to use stories in the classroom. So again, making it personal, drawing on the children to talk about the different pictures, drawing on their knowledge, and then providing them with words they don't already know. So we've now come to the end of this session on helping ESL learners in the early years classroom. I hope you can take away some ideas here that might be useful. And now I'm going to hand you over to Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for that excellent presentation. That was a wonderful session, and I'm sure our audience found it very useful. Just a quick reminder today that if you signed up for the webinar, your email will be in our database. So you will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the webinar slides as well. So as a reminder, Cambridge Early Years is the first stage on the Cambridge pathway for learners aged 3 to 6 years old. We're going to put a link in the chat for you now so you can find out more about this new stage on our pathway. Next slide, please, Claire. We also have a fantastic range of professional development opportunities available. If you scan the QR code on screen, you can access our professional development calendar and explore our early years courses. We have an excellent Getting to Know Cambridge Early Years webinar on the 15th and 16th of May, which we highly recommend attending if you want to find out more about our programme. We are also now offering PD support for our resources with our Preparing to Teach courses. We provide both self-study and online training, and we'll put a link in the chat for you to this as well. Next slide, please, Claire. Finally, we have so much more support for ESL learners as part of our Cambridge Early Years offer. On our School Support Hub, which is available for registered early years centres, you'll find lots of helpful training guidance like you can see on the left. Our resources on the right have also been developed with ESL learners in mind and include accessible stories, songs, flashcards, and activities, as well as guidance for practitioners. Great, so it's now time for our Q&A. If you have a question you'd like answered, make sure you post it before the session ends. So our first question today is from Mohammed, and they ask, I am teaching in a class where students belong to different countries. I don't know many of their first languages, and I may be making mistakes in pronouncing things. Do you have any advice for this?
I think this is it's a very, very good question. I think I mentioned during the session that trying to learn perhaps some simple words in the other languages, learning a little bit about their culture, different foods, different holidays, etc. I know this can be very challenging, but with children, ESL children, perhaps we do have to go slightly that extra mile. The other thing is reaching out to parents. Another way of learning, being able to understand the children in the languages is using non-verbal clues. So if you're not aware of what the word is in the other language, by using a non-verbal clue to the child, they'll be able to tell you what it is. You can engage in that communication and then say what the word is in the additional language. We have to grade our language and speed a lot. If you're with parents as well, I think that the communication with parents can be a big problem, especially when they don't speak the language of the classroom. If you do have things like parents' evenings, I think it's worth, again, you have to grade your language and speed. I would take with you children's work to use that as a starting point, so they have the visual clues as well to see what their child's been doing. Also, we do have digital resources. Use Google Translate or use another similar language tool. That can always be helpful. And then being listening and learning and being patient with parents. We also want them bored. We want the children to learn. We want them to feel secure in our environment. So there's a few ideas, but I think trying to learn, but getting the children on board as well. Children are very good at sharing their first language. And I think when we're using visuals, when we're using nonverbal communication, children pick up very fast. I think it's often us that are we tend to be more anxious about this situation more often than the children are.
Thank you, Claire. Some brilliant ideas there. I'm sure Mohammed will find useful. Our next question is from Telly, and they say, in my class, I try to avoid native words or translating things into mother language. I just apply English language in the classroom. Is that approach wrong?
No, I'm not. No, it's not wrong, but there is a place at this age for home languages. By that, you mentioned tell, was it? Translating. I don't necessarily mean you have to translate. If a child's using, for example, a word in their home language or a phrase in their home language, and they're pointing to something, and you very clearly know that, for example, it might be, this is a crocodile, and they're saying this is the crocodile in their home language. I'd suggest it's more reformulating. So it's like this parallel talk I mentioned earlier. So a child might be saying, well, this is my whatever, crocodilo in Spanish. And I say, oh, so that's your crocodile. It's lovely. I'm not necessarily, I'm just reformulating. I'm reinforcing the additional language. So yes, to speak as much English as possible, but to prohibit a home language is not a good idea at this stage. Allow children to use it, and you reformulate wherever possible.
Thank you, Claire. So our next question kind of touches on quite a lot of what we've been talking about today. But this question is, my students are not native speakers of English. So how can I start teaching them English at the age of 3? So do you have any advice for those very early stages, Claire, where they don't speak English already?
Okay, so I mean, this is a huge area. I'm going to draw on some of the main things we need to perhaps contemplate when we're teaching such young learners. I think when children first come into a classroom, the first thing I would establish are routines. Because children come in anxious, they're leaving their parents, they don't speak the language, they're suddenly listening to this gobbledygooch kind of, and they're like, ah. So the first thing is to make them feel comfortable and secure. So I'd set up routines. If the first thing I would do when these children come in, because some might be crying, some might be they've just left their parents, it's their first experience of school, it's their first experience of this new language, it can be overwhelming for children. So the first thing is comfort. A circle always creates comfort. It creates a community sense. Have toys. Make sure your classroom looks beautiful and tight, as though they're going into some kind of magical world. And start by being welcoming, smiling. You're early years teacher, so of course you're smiling, of course you're very loving to the children, etc., etc. But start with things like simple hello routines, simple hello songs. Use transition chants to different areas. So it may be them getting on a train, say from hello, perhaps we're going to sit down and do a worksheet, for example. So they get on the train and you can drop children off at their tables. It's a very slow process. We have to be very patient. Remember, children will be listening a lot at this point. Don't expect them to produce anything. Repeat a lot, repeat and repeat again. If you find they like something in the first weeks, do it again and again. A story they like. Should we read this story again? Read it again. And basically, don't expect too much at this age group. They're developing on all levels. They're developing physically, they're developing cognitively, they're developing behaviorally, they're learning to interact with their peers. This is a big development area for this age group. So I think it's being patient, taking it slow, and using good techniques, basically. Stories, rhymes always work really well at this age group. Children can colour, they can match, enjoy continuous provision areas, observe, monitor, take notes, what children like, etc. And be encouraging and always be positive. I could go
Thank
on and
you.
on, but I think it might be till midday. So, but the starting out, if you like, I hope there's a few ideas there.
Absolutely, yes, I think you're right. Patience is definitely key in that situation. Okay, so now we've got a couple of questions on the topic of parents. And Evita says, unfortunately, some parents do not speak English at home, hence the consistency is not there. So, do you have some tips to the best ways they can work with parents who don't speak English at home?
Um, a few tips would be, because obviously we cannot assume that all parents will speak the second language at home, is to one way, again, this kind of communication is essential. So for example, stories that children have been working with in class, I think it's important for work to go home. So it's actually the children that can start using some of those words they've learned to the parents. It becomes kind of like we reverse, and it becomes the children teaching the parents. So imagine they did do their family tree. Let's imagine family is a very early topic, comes very early on in the early years curriculum. They may have done a family tree. Take home the work or show it on the school platform and encourage the parents to sit down with them child and to say what those words are in English. So it could be as simple as, this is mummy, this is daddy, this is baby, this is brother, this is grandma, etc., etc. Use the children. The other thing is with stories go home. Children can try and read it themselves, point to words, point to pictures, things that they can identify in the new language with words they've been learning, but also try and make sure that on the school platform, the parents have access to this too. So they're listening and learning at the same time. The other thing that works very well at this age group is to provide parents early on in the course with very good sites, educational sites, that they can use with their children. Obviously, these are usually extremely easy to use. So not only will the child will be able to click on the pictures and say the word, but obviously for the parents, the visuals and the words will be there for them, and it will be very easy for them to follow with their children and work with their children as well. And those are a few ideas that come to mind in how we can help parents who don't speak this language at home.
Thank you, Claire. I really like the idea of the child and parent working together to learn English. I
Yeah.
think that's a really nice touch.
Mm.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a couple of questions now about classroom management. And one of them is how to handle situations when children are interrupting story times and perhaps aren't quite as settled down as we would like. Do you have any advice?
Mm. Um, I was talking to someone about this recently, who was doing, for example, a thesis on ADHD, and we were looking at children who need this special management in terms of a class, because inevitably a child that is very hyperactive can be disruptive to the rest of the class. So we do have to have special classroom management techniques to try to control this. So for example, story time tends to be a quieter moment, although the story I was talking about try to get children to interact all the time. It doesn't have to be just to sit down and read. With children who haven't got this concentration span, they want to be up, they want to be touching things, they want to be moving around, then give them a role, give them a job, make it an important job, because often these children can be, or let's say, traditionally told off for not behaving as they should behave. We have to adapt to these children. One way, as I said, is to give them a role, so they could be the classroom helper. So for example, if I'm using flashcards in my story, I'd have that child with me and say, come on then, Carlos, today you're going to be now just giving this child a role automatically means they have something to do with their hands, they're holding things up. So every time, for example, they hear the name of the animal, I say, come on, guys, hold up the picture of the animal, and they're showing the rest of the class. So not only that, they have kind of a teacher role, an important role. It could be them with a class puppet. So the class puppet can be involved in something, but generally give them a purpose. If this child is very tactile and needs to move around, then have them doing something actively, but make it productive.
Thank you very much, Claire. We've had some fantastic questions today, but that is all we have time for. And thank you for your questions, and apologies if we didn't get around to answering yours. Thanks also to Claire for taking the time to present today.